Welcome to the Chapter 12 Studio Review. We are looking at debugging in IntelliJ, and you're going to just get some practice using these tools that are built into IntelliJ to look for things line by line and check values and just get comfortable with it because it's a really good tool to use as you are developing your code in general. So you're going to need to go to your Java Web Dev Projects repo and go into the project for the Interfaces Studio. However, they have a separate branch that you can check out called Debugging that actually has their version of like a very simple solution to that studio. It does not get into the complexity of the bonus missions. It just handles the initial CD and DVD classes with base disk as the parent class, the base class, and the interface, optical disk, and then just the main method with, a few things here to create a couple of objects and, run some of the methods that are defined there. So you're just going to take this code and go through a few things here that they suggest for practicing using these debugging tools. Let's look first at just getting familiar with this code. So clearly they created, a CD and a DVD, and then they call these methods, but we need to look at the actual classes so you understand what the fields, because everybody solved this a little bit differently. And they decided to have multiple fields: name, storage capacity, remaining capacity, and capacity used. And then disk type and contents, which is an array list. And they don't really get into this at all. They don't use it. But you can kind of see where they might have been going. Like maybe there would be files that you could add to the disk or something. But we don't need to worry about that. They're focusing more on these up here. So base disk just has a constructor to allow you to pass in, this is the disk and how much it can hold max, what type it is, and what has been used up so far. And then it sets the name, sets the storage capacity, the disk type, and then calculates the capacity used and the remaining capacity based on what has been used so far that was passed in. And it has these two little methods here to calculate that and return those values to set them into these fields that are defined above. Then the other two methods are disk info, just to print out some information about this particular disk, and then to write data to the disk. And that includes having a little bit of validation here where we say, if the data size is bigger than the remaining capacity on the disk, then there's not enough space, and we need to let them know that. And we'll return that early and not even execute the rest of this code. But if there is room, if there's plenty of room, then we will go ahead and change the capacity used and the remaining capacity values and adjust them based on the data size that's being written to the disk, and then return a message that says exactly what was being done. So that's pretty much it for the base disk. And then the optical disk interface just requires two more methods to be defined by the classes. And then the optical disk interface requires two more methods be implemented in the CD and DVD classes that implement the optical disk interface. So CD and DVD both are going to extend base disk as the class to inherit from. They're also going to implement the interface, and that means we'll be defining these. Okay, so the only real difference between these two, they have this, they just use the same signature as the base disk class and just pass those values directly up through its constructor. Both of them do that. But what they do different is these two methods that are required by optical disk. They define them a little bit differently. The CD one says a CD spins at a rate of 200 to 500 RPM, and when you read the data, it says, "Would you like to play a game?" And then DVD, meanwhile, says the DVD spins at a rate of 570 to 1600 RPM. And if you read the data, it says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that." So just some real simple stuff just to demonstrate, that these methods are going to be, so we'll kind of be able to see that stuff being printed out into the console. So if we run this right now, we can see that the spin disk methods for each, produce the correct phrase for CD and DVD. If we read the data, we get those things that were printed out here, these phrases. And then when we go to write the data, the first one is the CD, right? We CD write data and we say, I've got a file, it's 275. I don't know if these are supposed to be kilobytes or probably kilobytes. I guess CDs only hold so much. So you would try to go ahead and do that. So it says data written disk, and then it says the remaining space is 75. So clearly it did the math, but all of that happened behind the scenes. This one, we try to write it, says the data size is 8,000. Well, that's way more than the max capacity, right? So all we see is not enough disk space. So then in the last ones where we just print the disk info, we get this readout for the CD and this readout for the DVD. And so all of that is as expected. There are really no errors here to debug, but we are just going to use this code to be able to practice using these tools. So I can set a breakpoint right here on the very first line, and then I can set one, let's say here, and then maybe like here. And let's run it in debug mode. So I'll click here and say debug. And it opens up the debugger. We see the console and then it switches back over to here. And at this point, recall that when you have a line highlighted, this is the line that you are currently on, it has not yet executed. So there's nothing really to show here except for args, which doesn't really mean much, but it's required by the main signature. Because this hasn't executed. This object has not been created. As soon as I hit the step over button, we see CD is available to us now. And we can expand this and see all the different fields and what their values are. And then as soon as I do it again, the line I'm currently on should execute. And so we also should see DVD. So I'll hit step over again. And there we go. Now we've got the DVD as well. So we can keep track of watching these values, either change or not change, depending on how we are manipulating these objects with the methods provided. So these four methods are not going to change anything. They're just going to basically send messages to be read in the console. So right now, if we go over to the console and look, we don't see anything having been printed yet once everything got up and running. But as soon as I step past this one, we see a CD spins at a rate of 200 to 500 RPM. So it executed that line of code as soon as I stepped over it. So I can now, if I want to, skip past all three of these to get to this breakpoint by hitting this run to cursor button here that looks like a fast forward, and see now in the console, we see the three other things that printed out from these three other calls to these methods. And now we're ready to execute this one, but it hasn't been executed yet. So let's switch back over to our debugger pane here and see, we still got the same values for everything. Nothing's been changed. But as soon as we go past the cd.write data and, see if it can write this 275 kilobyte file to the CD, then we should see these values right here change. So let's do that. I'm going to step forward, and sure enough, remaining capacity is now 75. Capacity used is 625. And if we go over to the console, it says data written to disk, remaining space equals 75. Now we have the storage capacity and everything set for the DVD. The next line is to try to write data for the DVD. Let's step past that. And we don't see any changes here, right? But that's because it says not enough disk space. So it, went in and it did all the calculations and determined that it didn't have enough space to write this file, so it didn't. And now when we see the, disk info for each one, we can step past that and see the first one, step again and see the next one. We've moved through and now we have information about everything. Okay, so and that's all there is to. So I can stop that. Let me take off the breakpoints here and here. One of the things that they want you to do is to practice, using watch expressions. If I am up here, let's go ahead and I'm going to add this one back in. Let me go ahead back to this debugger part here and put this expression in, and I'm going to say I want to keep track of cd.name. Okay, and I'm going to actually press this button over here that says add to watches so that it appears here by name. Okay, and I'll start it back up again. Okay, so it started, but you'll notice that it says cannot find local variable CD. That's because this line has not yet executed, right? And as soon as I step forward, now it has a value, CD example. And of course, we can see all the values by looking at this object right here. And if I continue stepping forward and stepping forward, I can skip, I can step forward, this value is never going to change. So maybe we should be watching something that's a little bit, it's actually potentially going to change. Let's run this again. And this time I'm going to put in, I want to watch cd dot max capacity. No, max capacity is not going to change either. I'm tripping. How about, I had to go look at the class, y'all, because I don't remember what the actual fields are called. Capacity used or remaining capacity. Let's do remaining capacity. So we'll come over here and I'll say cd dot remaining capacity. And of course, if I had not been on this line, it would have been able to find it for me. But okay, so now we have both of these being tracked. Neither of them can be found. We can move forward, and now they both have values. And the remaining capacity is at 350. I can step forward again, and DVD's been created. We can see that now down here now. Let me skip forward all the way to here. So we are right at the point where we are about to write data to the CD. So this still says 350, and as soon as I pass this, it should calculate. But let's do one more thing. Let's actually step into that method so that we can see it, doing those calculations line by line. So I'm going to hit this step into, and notice that there are two different methods here. So it says, which one do you want? So I'm going to use my arrow key to come over here to write data. And now we find ourselves over in basedisk.java, and we are looking at the first line inside the body of this write data method. So we are about to evaluate if data size is greater than remaining capacity. And so, of course, with it being 275 and there being 350 remaining, we should bypass this and go directly down here. So if I hit next, sure enough, we do. It returned false. So we came down here, and so now you see, data size is 275. Capacity used is still 350, and remaining capacity is still 350. So as we go past each of these lines and execute them, those values are going to change individually. So first we see capacity used change to 625. Then when we do it again, we see remaining capacity now is 75. And it still can't find them based on these watch values we set, because while we're in this file, CD doesn't exist. We need to step back out in order for those to have values. So let's do that. Yes, and now we see cd.remaining capacity is at 75. So now we can, move forward, and, you could continue on from there. Before we go through the process with DVD, though, I want to show you the usefulness of conditional breakpoints. I'm going to take off these breakpoints for now. I'm going to stop everything. Let's come over here and just, they ask here, like, would a conditional breakpoint make sense to use in the context of this app? I can think of one place where it might be useful. We have this write data method that is defined in the base class, which means that it gets called on a CD or a DVD. And we have multiple objects. So we want to test what happens, can we check and see what's happening only when this actually would return true. So I can put a breakpoint here in base disk and right click on it and say, I want you to stop here only if data size is greater than remaining capacity. Otherwise, don't bother. So we'll come back to main, and we can put a breakpoint here just to kind of stop and first, but we don't have to. But let's do that. Let's just run it like this. Okay. So it's getting ready to go here. All right, so now we are not at the point where we've not yet executed the CD, but it's going to call write data, which means it's going to run through this code. So if I go ahead and move forward, it just moves forward to DVD, and it did not stop on this breakpoint while we were running write data, because I, put a condition on it. I said only stop if this returns true. So now we find if we go to step forward again, and notice I'm not stepping into, I'm just stepping over. I'm just saying execute one more line of code. But in the process of that, it triggered this. So it took us over to base disk and said, oh, you've got a breakpoint here that was conditional, it triggered. And so now I want to stop here. And now, of course, if we move forward, we see that it does execute this line, return not enough disk space, because the data size was 8,000. So this is useful if you have a really big loop or a lot of nested, methods that are called from inside methods, and there's just a lot of complexity. Having conditional breakpoints can be useful because you may be able to narrow down, okay, I know it's only under these circumstances that I want to stop at this point in the code. So, let's just find out what's happening when that happens. Okay, so let's see, is there anything else they have here? Yeah, this is a little bit of a trick thing that they're doing here for you, DVD a name. So let's say, let's stop this, and I'm going to take the conditional breakpoint off and go back here. And let's just say we'll put a breakpoint here. That's fine. Doesn't really matter where we put it. And we'll come over here, and I'm going to say, let's say I want to take off this one. I could have just said remove all watches, I guess. Remove watch. And what I want to evaluate here is, let me get it running first in debug mode. Give it just a second. Here we go. Okay. So it's aware of CD and DVD when we stop at this point, right? They exist. If I put in dvd.aname, it is not happy. And if I right click, excuse me, not right click, if I hover over this, it says no such instance field a name. So that tells you something. You have to actually be watching an instance field, and you're like, I could have sworn I saw a name in there. Well, if we go and we look at the constructor of base disk, we see that the field itself is name. That's the field being set, but they used a name as the variable name for the parameter to allow that to be passed in and then set to that value. We can't access that parameter. That parameter exists only inside here. If you want to be able to watch something, it needs to exist either in the full scope of the class, or it needs to exist specifically as a field. I guess that's saying the same thing in Java because it is a field or property if it's out here in the full scope of the class. So I would have to change that to name. That's the only way I'm going to be able to watch for this value, but a name will never work because that's not actually a field. Okay, so I encourage you to continue playing around with this, and as you get into your next exercises in studios, continue making use of this debugger tool. It's very useful. It will help you arrive at where your errors or slightly wrong logic or whatever it is that's causing things to not go the way you thought they were going to go. You'll be able to narrow them down a lot faster. All right, I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you in the next one.